Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
You're listening to Bloomberg Businessweek with Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
So just in the last few days, Jess, we've learned that Chinese hackers have targeted the phones of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and affiliates of Kamala Harris's campaign. This is all according to NBC News. Then there's this great profile out today by our Bloomberg News colleague, Katrina Manson. It's about how Jen Easterly, who's director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, is working to protect election infrastructure from hacks and misinformation, and will need to convince the public, perhaps that's the hardest job, of the election's legitimacy after the vote.
That's right. Needless to say, Tim, data security is top of mind ahead of the election and also always top of mind for business leaders looking to safeguard their and ours data. That's where Lane Bess comes in. He's the CEO of the deep learning AI cybersecurity platform, Deep Instinct. He's also the former COO of the publicly traded security software company Zscaler. And before that, he was the CEO of Palo Alto Networks. So yeah, he knows about this stuff, Tim.
It's good to have you with us, Lane. Thanks so much for joining us. Hey, before we get into what exactly Deep Instinct does, because it's distinct from some of the other companies that are out there, what is the biggest threat that you think we as a country faces when it comes to cybersecurity?
It is really the unknown threats. Today, a lot of the money and resources and expenditures are towards known threats. And the unknown threats are becoming much greater. 72% of the threats that hit companies and governments today are of a never seen nature. And therefore, the systems that have been trained and the machine learning technologies that are typically in place can't stop them. And in the early phases of new technologies, and I'll point specifically to AI, the advantage goes to the attackers because they can use simple tools and sophisticated ones to compromise companies' data and ultimately cause havoc and, in some cases, nation-state attacks. It takes a time for the practitioners to catch up because they've already invested millions in the cyber technologies, and they've got to explain why they're going to spend more money to address some of the more challenging, unknown, new, never-seen threats. They eventually catch up, but in this early stage, particularly with the AI threats, it can be quite dangerous.
So what are the known unknown threats potentially?
Sure. So known threats are usually in families of threats that have been seen before. And the cloud models, which many of the companies in cyber have been able to train, can essentially see them. But typically, in using AI tools, they can change code very slightly and they can inject code. And typically that evades even the best companies' defense in depth capabilities. And so simple changes, aided in some cases by more sophisticated AI, can take something that was generally in a known category family and create something entirely unseen before, and therefore it can get through and cause significant data breaches.
Are we more concerned about data breaches, or are we more concerned about an entire electrical grid becoming unusable, about traffic signals being disrupted and tunnels getting shut down, bank accounts being wiped out, or are those all related?
They all are related. And the science, particularly the science that we address at Deep Instinct, addresses both cases. Typically, though, what we're seeing right now is the biggest cost to companies is in data breaches. The average data breach is a 4.5 million, and we've seen some notable ones that have been in the hundreds of millions. But if you talk about infrastructure disruption, these, what I consider to be infrastructure and nation state attacks, these can just as easily be launched using the same tools. And if you take a look at the industry, it has been pretty much in a layers of defense, detect, remediate, fix afterwards. The posture that governments and also companies has to take now is to get the most sophisticated AI to battle the onslaught of sophisticated AI to prevent these threats. And it does take a specific type of technology, one in the form of deep learning that we have.
So, Lane, walk us through the difference between AI, machine learning, and deep learning, and how cyber criminals are actually using deep learning right now.
Yeah. Well, deep learning is like a brain, a neural network. And without getting too much into the science of how it works, you and I can take massive amounts of data in our brain and we can make determinations and inferences, and in our case, instinctual decisions. Machine learning models, which can be very sophisticated, are based on parameters that have been defined by people and rules that are trained by people. And therefore, they don't train upon themselves only what they've been defined with. Deep learning models, neural network models, are self-training and take massive amounts of data. In this case, anything, everything that might be in the cyberspace, and essentially extrapolate the potential of something being a threat with 99% efficacy. So that's probably the biggest differentiation.
When it comes to individuals out there, like I know that a lot of what you focus on is keeping companies safe, but at the end of the day, we're only as strong as the weakest link. And I think that's why.
Correct.
And I know we do this here, but we do so much training about understanding phishing, understanding.
Right. I just did another training. I think the deadline was on
That's right.
Tuesday. I was on vacation last week and came back, and I had to do all the courses, or they were going to shut off my email.
That's correct.
But there's a reason why. It's
Right.
because with this social engineering, all they need to do to gain access is get access through one of us. So
that's correct.
What's the way that we need to recognize threats in a world where I can get a phone call, it looks like it's from Amazon, but it's really somebody who wants to steal money from me. It looks like it's from my bank, but it's really someone who wants to steal money from me.
Yeah. And you hit it on the head. Most organizations, and it's a big business in and of itself, the training and readiness, and IT organizations are spending a lot on this. And we ourselves as individuals have to do it because the weakest link is the insider threat.
Yeah.
And we've seen many of these stories. Ultimately, though, what happens is those threats get in some way they're going to go in and sit within your data sets or within the applications in your environment. So even if they evade through social engineering, having an efficacy level and ability to determine that something that has come in is not quite kosher is going to be a key backup to the training that needs to take place. And most of the detection and remediation is clean up after the accidents already happened. So I would absolutely, you're dead on, and I'm happy to hear that Bloomberg is taking the efforts. We do it with our own employees regularly, including myself, in terms of the social engineering. And this, again, is where AI tools and some of the simplest tools with regard to social engineering can help evade.
So I don't know if this happens to you, Tim, but I've been constantly getting messages that are definitely scams, but they're supposed to be from recruiters. But this has been happening
Are they
to
text messages?
Yes, they're text messages, and this has been happening to some of my colleagues too. But it's scary because you're wondering, how you're getting this. Sometimes it happens to me on WhatsApp as well. It used to be more Bitcoin messages, but now it's more of these kind of fake recruiting type messages. Right, but I like my current gig, so I'm going to try to keep that. But Lane, what safeguards do you think need to be put in place when this is such a complicated type of issue, and especially with all of the technology involved?
Right. At the end of the day, common sense is probably the thing that I say to most people. When you get something from somebody you don't know, and I get it all the time. In fact, while we were talking here, I think I got a spam call coming into my phone.
Yeah.
Seriously, it's just every day. And just rule of thumb is if it's not from somebody you know, if it's not from the organization you're in, you just don't click on it. As enticing as the headline might be, there's a lot of clickbait we see today. And at the end of the day, this is just going to become an ongoing thing. And again, our goal at Deep Instinct is to make it so that if there is a breach, wherever they try to get at critical company data, or critical company IP or resources, we will detect it and we will stop it and flag it. So I'd like to think that even if the first line of defense, which is practical behavior by our employees and by individuals, deep instinct, deep learning technology, I say it this way, it's the best AI to fight AI.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that and sort of the technology that's being used here. Because one thing that I always wonder is who has the upper hand right now? Is it the bad actors who have incredible upside, but also a lot of downside? Or is it the people who are trying to protect us? Who has more technological advantage right now?
Yeah, I hate to say it, particularly in the AI space, advantage does go to the bad actors, and one of the challenges is, and one of the hardest jobs in cyber and in IT is the CIO and the Chief Information Security Officer. These individuals have gone to the well to put in tremendous amount of cyber protection and detection technology for a number of years. And even still, ransomwares and attackers get through, and it's getting even more challenging. The pace at which the malicious acts are taking place, and the ability for the teams of people within enterprises and governments can address them, the gap is widening. And so again, the bad actors have the advantage. And now the challenge that a lot of the IT professionals have is they have to once again go to management and say, this is a continuing and escalating. This is probably one of the most difficult jobs in technology, the cyber protection, and it's only going to get greater. And so I encourage organizations to not think about, well, what are we going to replace in our tech stack to justify the cost of prevention? My view is that this is a budget line that unfortunately continues to need to be evaluated. But more importantly, these practitioners need to go beyond the technologies they've been using and look at the more sophisticated technologies, such as the things that we provide at Deep Instinct, because the same old tools aren't going to work against the bad actors. Eventually, the tech catches up, but early on, it's a challenge.
Lane, appreciate you joining us. That's Lane Bess, CEO over at Deep Instinct. He joins us from New York.
As you know, Tim, this is a really big issue here when you're thinking about how women are continuing, unfortunately, to lose these C-suite seats in corporate America. In fact, women's representation in senior level positions at U.S. companies saw signs of fatigue for the first time in 2 decades, with gender parity in C-suite positions potentially not reaching parity until 2072, according to an S&P report earlier this year.
That's literally a lifetime.
Yes, that's a lifetime. I would probably be dead by then.
Hopefully not.
Hopefully not.
Hopefully not.
Hopefully not.
I'm not going to do the math on that, but hopefully not.
Hopefully not, though. But anyway, I digress. But while there are lingering issues affecting women's abilities to seek, prepare, and attain business leadership positions, there actually are some signs recently of progress in the total number of women enrolled in top full-time MBA programs this fall by a record-setting pace here. So joining us now to discuss more is Elissa Sangster, CEO of Forte Foundation from San Antonio, Texas. And for some insight for our listeners, Forte Foundation is a nonprofit designed to increase opportunities for women in leadership through access to business education and professional development. Thank you so much, Elissa, for joining us. And I was looking through this latest report that y'all put together here. Walk us through some of the highlights and what drove women's MBA enrollment this fall.
Sure. So, we're seeing some great results. We are seeing women at right now 42% enrolled in top business schools. And that has been increasing, I believe, over the last 5 years. We've seen a 4% increase. We've seen a number of schools reach gender parity. 8 of our schools have hit that 50-50 or more mark. But we've also seen some great progress at 45% and at 40%.
And looking through this too, because there's a lot of interesting points here. And of course, Tim and I were just mentioning some of the pitfalls. What do you think before was really holding back some of that? Because I know COVID was a big issue where we saw a lot of women having to pull back from the workforce.
Sure. I think, there's a lot of choices that people had, men and women, when they were going back to school during the COVID time. So it's a big move, and it's a big investment, and you have to really think about all the factors. What we saw about 20 years ago is that women were not pursuing business school because they didn't have a lot of role models. They didn't hear from people who influenced them that was a path they should pursue. And so there were a number of other factors, but those things were holding them back. And that's what we've been working on the last 20 years, is how to chip away at some of those misperceptions they had about business school and business careers.
You know, I hesitate to tie everything to the election, but it's top of mind for so many people here. Tuesday is election day, and the U.S. could see its first female president in its entire history. It also could not. But I'm wondering if you think a change at the top, and I literally mean at the top, like the most important position in the entire country, if that moves the needle.
I think it absolutely does, because it is a change in potential policies. It's a change in who you see every day on your television. It's inspirational. I mean, that is the role model for everyone. And so I think, why it may not inspire more women to go to get their business degree, I think it does inspire them to lead. And I think ultimately that's the position you want to see a woman in.
There's also something happening right now that we've been hearing a lot about in the context of the election. And then that's the idea that more women are going to college, more women are graduating from college, and that even though as a whole, women are still at a paid less than men, there's this idea that when it comes to advancement, and this is a lot of been talked about this with regard to the male support for Donald Trump. There's this idea that that men have been left back, and I'm sorry that it's hard for me to say that with a straight face, just because you look at all the data and you see that women are still on a salary basis. There's like equal pay day as months after the first of the year. So, but I'm wondering how you see that playing into this, Elissa.
Well, I think it's discouraging when you hear that as a top line message, because I think you're right. Maybe for a blink of the eye, we've seen change happen and women have progressed. But I think if you look back decades and centuries, we're just now getting to the tip of the iceberg. And so I'm not sure that there's a lot to complain about on either side. I think we just need to kind of let things settle, and we need to make sure that we're focused on, especially in business leadership, building inclusive cultures, building opportunities for all of our people to advance, and to make sure that companies are focused on that, and they're focused on how to engage all of their employees in this discussion. I think it's unnecessary really to say men are not advancing at the same rate as women, especially in business leadership. I mean, there are some other societal things that we want to focus on, and I don't want men to be left behind. But I also don't think that's really reflective of what's going on.
Of course, there was a debate, especially over the last decade, as more and more people were getting their MBAs and how much useful that would be as people were getting, say, CFAs and other things. But when you're looking more recently, especially coming out of COVID, how have especially women been putting their MBAs to work in particular industries?
Well, I think what you see is a really healthy pipeline of women with their MBA. And what that typically means is you're going to see strong outcomes in the consulting industry, in financial services, in consumer packaged goods companies, and in technology. I mean, those are kind of the 4 top recruiters that are coming to MBA campuses. It also means that more women are going to be starting their own businesses, because they're going to be going through these incubators that are on these business school campuses. And that's really encouraging as well. Given the lack of funding in VC, you want to see more companies being started by women and being successfully funded.
And are you starting to see that in the data as well, as far as starting their own companies?
We're definitely seeing women advance. So we've been doing this work for 20 years, and I think you're seeing them just becoming eligible for these very senior C-suite positions. So I do think there is a robust pipeline. I think companies do have to continue being intentional about how they advance all of their employees, and are they providing career roadmaps and ways for women to advance, and making sure, again, that they're focused on that culture and really engaging all of their potential leaderships in that conversation very transparently about how they see them progressing to the top.
And ultimately, we only have about 30 seconds left, but what do you think really needs to change in order for this to accelerate here and change things?
Well, I think in business school, we're getting very close to parity. And so I would say the big thing that needs to change is, once those women have graduated, how are we making sure that their advancement is possible? There's a lot more chutes than ladders in a woman's career, and we want to make sure that they're given those ladders to continue climbing and excelling.
Thanks so much for joining us. Really great insight into all things, and especially such an important topic, and great question from Tim about obviously at the top and how that could potentially change things here. But Elissa Sangster, CEO of Forte Foundation, joining us from San Antonio, Texas. Great getting your insight on all of this. But Tim,
I'm sorry, the election is top of mind.
I mean, it's a great point though, as far as like, does that change the dynamic when we're at the top though?
I think a lot of people argue it's all about representation.
That's right.